I heard it before I saw the dull thud of cardboard hitting wet dirt. One box. Then another. Then another. Each sound landed like a heartbeat I didn't want to count. When I stepped outside, the smell of rain and cut grass mixed with something bitter, dust and old paper. My husband's things were scattered across the front yard like trash after a storm. His toolbox. His folded uniform. The box that held his service medals, open, soaking under the drizzle. For a moment, I couldn't move. The world felt tilted. Then I saw Kyle. He was standing on the porch, arms crossed, smirk sharp enough to cut through the fog. "We're making space for the baby," he said, like it was nothing. Just words tossed into the air. I looked at him, then at the boxes again. The baby? My grandchild? That's what this was about? My husband's memory traded for a nursery wall? I wanted to speak, but my throat burned. Not from anger, not yet. From disbelief. The porch light flickered above him, glowing and dying in uneven beats, as if the house itself disapproved. Behind him, I saw Melanie, my daughter, hovering near the hallway. Her hands rested on her stomach. She looked away when my eyes met hers. That broke me faster than the sight of those boxes. Because that look wasn't guilt. It was a surrender. Kyle nudged one of the boxes with his shoe, and a stack of letters spilled out, my husband's handwriting, the old kind with blue ink fading at the edges. He stepped over them like they were nothing. I bent down, trying to gather what I could. The paper was wet, soft. Some words had already bled into the page. I could barely make out his name anymore. Behind me, Kyle said, "You should have told us if you planned to keep all this junk. It's been sitting there for years." Junk. That word did something to me. I stood up slowly. My hands were shaking, but I held my voice still. "This isn't junk," I said. "It's history." He laughed, short and dry. "History doesn't pay rent, Evelyn." I turned toward the porch again. "Where's Melanie?" He shrugged. "Inside. Resting." "You shouldn't upset her." That last line, "you shouldn't upset her," wasn't a concern. It was a warning. A quiet way of saying you're the problem here. I didn't answer. I just kept picking up the letters, one by one, until my knees hurt. As I reached for the last one, I saw something that made me pause, a photograph half buried in the mud. My husband is holding our newborn daughter on the porch, this same porch, back when the paint was new, and the light didn't flicker. I wiped the mud off and held it against my chest. Kyle turned away, mumbling something under his breath. I didn't ask what. That night, I dried each letter on the kitchen counter. The rain had smeared most of them beyond saving. And yet, as I looked at the mess around me, boxes torn, shelves empty, walls echoing, one thought refused to leave my mind. If love built this house, arrogance was tearing it apart. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the porch light flicker until dawn. And when it finally went out, completely, I whispered to myself, "This isn't over." Because I knew what he didn't. Every home remembers the hands that built it. Tell me something, I'd say to the audience here, what would you do if someone disrespected the memory of the person you loved most? Would you stay quiet, or remind them whose name is on the deed? I used to believe love was the glue of a family. That day, I realized it can also be a weapon. When Melanie first brought Kyle home, she called him the kind of man who listens. And at first, he did. He laughed easily, carried the groceries, and complimented the roast chicken I made on Sundays. But little things changed after the wedding, subtle, quiet shifts only a mother would notice. He started correcting her stories. Finishing her sentences. Rolling his eyes when she talked about things that mattered to her. Just teasing, he'd say with a grin. But teasing, when constant, becomes control. One night, months ago, Melanie came over alone. I could tell she'd been crying, but she brushed it off. "He's just under pressure, Mom," she said. "He's been working so hard. I just need to be patient." I told her patience isn't love if it only goes one way. She smiled weakly and said, "You don't understand him yet." Maybe I didn't want to. Now, standing in that same kitchen months later, I watched him throw my husband's memories into boxes while she stood in the background, silent. Her silence felt heavier than his cruelty. As I wiped the counter, my hand brushed over the corner of one of those letters. My husband's handwriting, strong, sure, protective, it was like hearing his voice again. And for the first time since he passed, I felt him with me. Maybe that's why I didn't cry that day. Because I knew this wasn't just about a man cleaning out a room. It was about the spirit of this house, and the quiet war happening inside it. That night, Melanie came to my room. She stood in the doorway like a stranger. "I didn't know he was going to do that," she whispered. "Yes, you did," I said softly. "But you didn't stop him." Her eyes filled, but she didn't argue. "I can't fight him right now, Mom. I need peace." Peace. That word sounded like surrender all over again. I reached for her hand, but she stepped back. For a moment, I almost said what I'd been holding back for months, that she'd married someone who saw love as leverage. But the look in her eyes stopped me. It wasn't fear. It was exhaustion. "So instead," I said, "you'll come back when you remember who you are." She looked confused. "You'll understand one day," I added. After she left, I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching one of my husband's medals. I thought about the word home. How quickly it can turn into a house when respect leaves it. The next morning, I heard Kyle hammering something in the guest room, my husband's old study. He was already repainting the walls, covering memories with beige. He didn't notice me standing in the doorway. When he finally turned, he smiled. "Told you it'd feel bigger once we cleared the clutter." I stared at him for a long second. Then I said, "Some things you clear, Kyle. Some things you cleanse." He laughed, like I'd said something old-fashioned. But my words weren't for him, they were for me. Because right then, I made a promise. I'd get my daughter back. And I'd remind this house, and everyone in it, what love was supposed to mean. Nothing spreads faster than humiliation in a small town. By morning, the boxes were gone, scooped up by the garbage truck that comes every Thursday at 7. I stood at the window and watched them lift what was left of my husband's things. A photograph slipped out from one of the flaps, floated a second in the air, then vanished into the compactor. And just like that, 25 years of love and service disappeared with a hiss of hydraulics. The sound drew attention. Of course, it did. Mrs. Hensley across the street, always in her robe, was pretending to water her tulips. Mr. Reed next door peeked through his blinds, the ones that never fully close. I could feel the weight of their stares pressing through the glass. They didn't mean harm. That's just how small towns breathe, through whispers. By noon, I knew exactly what would happen, the story would twist. By evening, people would say, "Did you hear? Evelyn's son-in-law is cleaning out her junk. Poor thing, maybe she's losing it." In this town, sympathy is just another form of gossip. Inside, Kyle's voice carried through the thin walls. "It's time your mom learns boundaries," he said, not even bothering to whisper. Melanie tried to hush him, but he kept talking, loud enough for me to hear, quiet enough for her to pretend she didn't. I stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a cup of coffee gone cold, and whispered to myself, "Then he'll learn mine." That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not rage, resolve. That night, after they went to bed, I walked softly into the living room. I sat on the couch, opened my husband's old notebook, the one where he used to track home repairs and grocery lists, and on the first empty page, I wrote, "Record everything." Then I found my phone, set it to silent, and started taking small videos: the hallway, the broken shelf, the boxes missing from the study. Nothing dramatic. Just quiet evidence. I wasn't planning revenge. I just wanted the truth, documented. Every day after that, I'd set the phone on the counter when Kyle talked too loudly, or slip it in my pocket when he'd mutter something sharp under his breath. You learn a lot about people when they think you've stopped paying attention. Outside, the rain finally cleared. The street smelled like wet asphalt and lilac. But the air inside our house, it stayed thick. Melanie moved more slowly now, like she was walking on glass. I caught her glancing at me sometimes, a look that said she still loved me but didn't know how to prove it. And I just smiled back. Because sometimes you have to play small to collect your strength. 2 days later, a knock came at the door, the mailman, holding a small padded envelope. Return address, Veterans Memorial Association. Inside was a replacement medal. The same one Kyle had thrown into the mud. I hadn't asked for it. Someone must have found my email from years ago when I registered Raymond's service number. I held it in my hand. The weight was light, but the meaning was heavy. I pinned it to my cardigan and whispered, "He's still here." That afternoon, when Kyle saw it, he frowned. I thought we agreed to store all that stuff away. I said, "We didn't agree on anything." He opened his mouth to speak, then stopped, maybe because for the first time, he heard something different in my tone. Not softness. Not fear. Something else. The neighbors could stare all they wanted. The garbage could take what it wanted. But I still had my memory, my faith, and my proof. And if Kyle thought I was weak, he was about to meet a kind of strength they don't teach in law school or boardrooms. Because when dignity gets dragged into the dirt, it doesn't die. It roots. The silence between my daughter and me was louder than any argument. It started the way most silences do, with routine. Kyle was at the head of the table, phone beside his plate. Melanie sat across from me, passing the salt like a stranger. The sound of forks against porcelain filled the room. No words, just chewing, sipping, existing. The air felt heavy with unspoken things. "Dinner's good," Kyle said, finally. His voice sliced through the stillness, but not in gratitude, in ownership. Like he had allowed peace to happen. Melanie nodded quickly, too quickly. "Yeah, Mom, it's great." I smiled politely. The chicken was dry. The mashed potatoes were over-whipped. But no one was really tasting anything anyway. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his stomach. "I was thinking," he said, "we should repaint the kitchen next week. Lighter colors. Brighter energy." I said nothing. Melanie jumped in, her voice almost pleading, "It could be nice, Mom. Maybe a fresh start for everyone." Fresh start. The words felt like disinfectant, trying to wipe something that wasn't dirt but disrespect. "I like it the way it is," I said finally. Kyle's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You like things old." I set my fork down slowly. "Some things age well." He stared at me. I stared back. Melanie dropped her napkin. "Please, can we not?" He laughed, breaking the tension. "I'm joking, Evelyn. Don't be so serious." But I wasn't serious. I was done pretending. After dinner, I cleared the plates while they went into the living room to watch TV. From the sink, I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter, his, loud and certain, hers, softer, forced. I dried my hands and stepped out onto the porch. The night was cold, and the wood creaked beneath me. I sat on the top step, clutching the only thing I managed to save from the chaos, Raymond's old pocket knife. He used to carry it everywhere, not as a weapon, but as a tool. For cutting rope, fixing loose hinges, and carving initials into fence posts. Now it sat in my palm, small but steady. A reminder of practicality and quiet defense. Inside, the TV glowed blue through the window. Their laughter rose and fell, faint against the hum of cicadas. I thought about all the dinners we'd shared when Raymond was alive, the way he'd pull out her chair, the jokes he'd tell that made her roll her eyes but smile anyway. Back then, our silences were comfortable. Now they were walls. I whispered to the dark, "Lord, show me how to keep my peace without losing my voice." Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Then another answered. That's when I noticed something new, a faint flashing light under the porch rail. My phone, still recording from earlier, had caught everything. Kyle's tone. His dismissive words. His mockery at dinner. It wasn't proof of a crime. But it was proof of a pattern. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet. But I knew why I was keeping it. When love becomes a visitor in your own home, you start preparing for eviction, emotional or otherwise. And as I sat there in the dark, I made a decision. If they were building a new life by erasing the old one, they'd soon find that I wasn't gone, I was documenting. The next morning, I woke before sunrise and brewed a pot of coffee. The air smelled of cinnamon and rain-soaked wood. For the first time in months, I felt awake, not just alive, but alert. Because sometimes survival isn't loud. It's silent. It's a mother sitting on a porch with a pocket knife and a plan. Sometimes the dead speak at the right moment. It happened on a Thursday morning, the kind that smells like dust and leftover coffee. The house was still, no footsteps, no voices, just me and the sound of wind brushing the curtains. I had been cleaning what was left of Raymond's old study, trying to bring order to the emptiness Kyle had left behind. The room looked stripped bare. Paint chipped near the corners, shelves empty, the air stale with silence. I ran my hand along the baseboard, remembering how Raymond used to complain about it being uneven. "One of these days, Eve," he'd said, "I'll fix that corner. You can't build a home on crooked edges." Funny how those words came back now. I pressed my thumb against the baseboard, and it shifted slightly. Something clicked, a faint hollow sound. I pulled at it, and a small panel came loose. Behind it, wedged between the wood and insulation, was a yellowed envelope. "My name is on the front." His handwriting. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My hands trembled, not from fear, but reverence. I sat down on the floor, light spilling across my knees, and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter written years ago, before his illness, before Kyle, before the cracks in our family began. It read, "Eve, if this home ever forgets our love, remind it who built it. Don't let anyone walk through its doors and change its meaning. You were the heart of this house long before I put up these walls. And if someday you feel alone here, know this, love isn't gone. It's just resting where the light hits the floor." I read those lines over and over until the ink blurred through tears. It wasn't sadness, it was something deeper. A release. Like every hurt I'd been swallowing, I finally found a place to land. I pressed the letter against my chest and whispered, "You knew, didn't you? You knew I'd need this." The morning light caught the photo of us that still hung crooked above the doorway. I hadn't noticed how the sun hit that frame, a soft beam, right on his face. It felt like the house was breathing again. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe minutes, maybe hours. When I finally stood, something inside me was different. Not louder, but steadier. Like a current had shifted direction. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in my apron pocket. That paper wasn't just memory anymore, it was evidence of a promise. When Melanie came home that evening, I was still in the study, rearranging the few things I'd salvaged. She stood in the doorway, hesitant. "Mom, you don't have to stay in here," she said softly. "We can turn it into something new." I looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were tired, her shoulders tense. She was living in two loyalties, and both were pulling her apart. I said, "Sweetheart, not everything old needs to be replaced. Some things just need to be remembered. Her lips parted, but no words came. She turned away, murmuring, "Kyle won't like that." I smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time he learns what this house was built on. That night, I placed the letter on my nightstand. The air felt lighter. I fell asleep to the sound of rain against the roof, not the storm kind of rain, but the steady kind that washes things clean. And in my dream, Raymond stood on the porch, wiping his hands on a rag, saying, "You've got this, Eve. Don't let them take it from you." When I woke up, I knew exactly what to do next. Because that letter wasn't just his goodbye. It was my beginning. Some people inherit land or money. I inherited a mission. By the weekend, I was done being quiet. The morning started with the sound of Kyle's voice echoing down the hall, commanding, confident, like always. "We'll start painting next week. I've already ordered supplies." I walked into the kitchen, holding Raymond's letter. "No, you won't." He turned, a smirk playing on his face. "Excuse me?" I placed the letter on the counter, folded neatly beside my coffee mug. "The room stays empty until I decide otherwise." He laughed, a deep, dismissive sound that made the air colder. "Evelyn, you've got to be kidding me. That room is wasted space. We need it for the baby." Melanie stepped between us, hands up like a peacekeeper. "Mom, please. It's just a room. Don't do this." But my voice didn't shake. "It's not just a room. It's your father's legacy. And as long as I'm breathing, it's staying that way." Kyle leaned in, too close. His breath smelled like mint and arrogance. "You don't make the rules here anymore." I met his gaze. "Then you're in the wrong house." For a moment, everything stopped, the clock, the air, even Melanie's whisper. He straightened up, snorted, and said, "You can't talk to me like that." I said, "Then stop giving me reasons to." He stormed out of the kitchen, muttering under his breath. The door slammed so hard the picture frames rattled. Melanie turned to me, eyes wet. "Why do you keep pushing him?" I sighed. "Sweetheart, I'm not pushing him. I'm standing where I've always stood. He's the one shoving." She opened her mouth, then stopped. "He's just under pressure. You know how things are." "Pressure doesn't excuse cruelty," I said softly. "Your father worked 2 jobs under pressure. He never once raised his voice to make himself taller." She looked down, and for a flicker of a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who used to stand on a chair beside me, stirring pancake batter, asking questions about everything. That girl was still in there somewhere. I just needed to remind her who she came from. When she left for work, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years, Raymond's old friend, Thomas Green. A retired attorney, widower, and one of the few people I trusted completely. When he answered, his voice was rough but warm. "Evelyn? My word, it's been too long." I explained everything, the boxes, the insults, the threats to my space. He listened quietly. Then he said, "Do you know whose name is on the deed, Evelyn?" I hesitated. "Ours. Raymond and mine. Joint tenancy." He chuckled softly. "Then there's something Kyle should know. When one spouse dies, full ownership passes to the other." "Meaning?" I finished the sentence for him. "The house is mine." He paused. "Exactly. If he's trying to control your home, that's not family tension, that's trespassing on your peace. I'll pull the property record just to confirm." I thanked him, feeling both nervous and strangely liberated. When we hung up, I looked around the kitchen, same walls, same table, but suddenly, everything looked different. The house didn't feel like a battleground anymore. It felt like territory I had every right to protect. Later that afternoon, Kyle came back in, pretending to be calm. I talked to Melanie, he said, and she agrees we should just move your things out while you're gone next week. I looked at him, steady. Try it. He laughed, the sound brittle. You don't scare me. I'm not trying to, I said. I'm informing you. For once, he didn't have a comeback. He just stared, then stormed off again, that same door slam echoing down the hall. That night, as the sun went down, I stood at the window holding Raymond's letter again. Outside, the wind stirred the branches of the oak tree we planted together the year Melanie was born. Its roots had cracked the sidewalk by now, stubborn, strong, unmovable. I smiled. Like father, like tree. My phone buzzed with a message from Thomas. Property confirmed. Sole owner, Evelyn Carter. The next morning, I printed the record and slid it into a folder labeled Truth. And when Kyle came down for breakfast, all polished confidence, I met him at the table and said calmly, before you make any more plans about this house, you might want to read who actually owns it. He froze. His eyes darted to the document, then back at me. For the first time since he moved in, he didn't have a smirk. Because when power shifts, it doesn't need to announce itself. It just stands quietly and waits to be noticed. When I first read the clause, I thought I misread it. Raymond's handwriting was neat but firm, just like his character. His will didn't just leave the house to me, it made it untransferable without my explicit consent. That meant one thing: no one, not even Melanie or her husband, could claim ownership while I still breathed. For the first time since that awful afternoon, I felt something like air returning to my lungs. Not revenge. Not pride. Just justice, long delayed. The next morning, I brewed coffee early, not out of kindness, but to witness what truth does when it walks into a room pretending to be home. Kyle came downstairs half asleep, shirtless, scrolling his phone like the world owed him comfort. Melanie trailed behind, her eyes red from another night of tears she thought I didn't notice. I placed the folded document beside his plate, casual, unthreatening. He glanced down, saw the attorney's seal, and froze. "What's this?" he asked. "Just something you might want to read," I said, sipping my coffee. When he saw the clause, the color drained from his face. He looked up at me, then back at Melanie, as if trying to calculate how power could shift without him noticing. "You wouldn't dare throw us out," he said, voice tight. I smiled, not cruelly, but with the kind of calm that unsettles men who only understand control. "I don't have to," I said quietly. "You'll do that yourself." He stared at me for a long moment, then scoffed, tossing the paper back onto the table like it burned. "We'll see about that." When he stormed off, Melanie just stood there. Torn. Confused. Maybe ashamed. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. The truth was already working its way through the walls of this house, settling into the cracks they'd left behind. As the front door slammed, a picture frame rattled off the mantel, Raymond's photograph. His smile caught the morning light, like he approved. That night, I recorded a new entry in my notebook, not for court, not for proof, but for my sanity. Peace doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stay standing when the storm passes. And for the first time in months, I slept without checking if the door was locked. I knew it would happen. Men like Kyle can't lose quietly. It started small, short tempers, slammed drawers, snide comments about my meddling. Then came the paranoia. He started watching me like I was the one invading his home. He followed me from room to room, pretending to tidy up. He asked Melanie about my errands, my phone calls, and my lawyer. It was pathetic, the way fear makes a man dangerous. One evening, I deliberately left the envelope, the one with the will, halfway tucked under my ledger in the study. It wasn't carelessness. It was bait. I heard him rummaging hours later, long after Melanie went to bed. Papers rustled. Drawers slid open. Then, silence. When I stepped into the hallway, he was standing there with the letter in his hands. His jaw was tight, his face pale. I didn't move. I just said, "You found it." He didn't answer. Just crumpled it slightly in his grip. Then, the flash of anger. "You think this gives you power? You think you can make me look like a fool in my own house?" I stared at him, steady, unblinking. "You did that yourself, Kyle." He took a step toward me, then stopped. Something in my eyes must have told him not to. Melanie came out then, startled, still in her robe. "What's going on?" Kyle turned toward her, voice soft now, the mask returning. "Your mother's playing games again." She looked from him to me. I could see it, the doubt beginning to crack. The loyalty she'd wrapped around him like armor was starting to split. "I'm not playing games," I said quietly. "I'm protecting what your father built." She didn't respond. Just walked past him and sat on the edge of the couch, staring at my hands. The silence was suffocating. Kyle threw the letter onto the table and went upstairs, muttering something about getting a real lawyer. When I picked up the envelope, a folded note slipped out, the one I'd planted for him to find. In bold handwriting, it read, "Respect is the rent you pay to live in peace." Melanie looked up, read it, and whispered, "He'll never understand that." Her voice cracked. It was the first time she'd spoken against him in months. I sat beside her, but didn't touch her. Sometimes, comfort too early makes the wound close incorrectly. Outside, the rain began again, tapping against the windows, steady, cleansing. That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear them arguing quietly upstairs. Words muffled, sharp, then fading. I didn't smile. I didn't rejoice. But I felt it, the shift. The same shift that comes before a storm clears. Because in this house, truth was no longer hiding. It was awake. And so was I. By the end of that week, I'd stopped pretending things were normal. Kyle's anger had evolved, quieter, more calculating. Doors shut harder. Footsteps heavier. Words sharper, though whispered just low enough to sound innocent to anyone passing by. I started locking my bedroom door again. That was my first warning sign. When a woman starts locking doors in her own home, something's broken far deeper than the hinges. It was the night he followed me out to the garage that changed everything. I'd gone to retrieve an old blanket chest for donation. He appeared behind me, his breath close, voice low. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching me lose control?" I turned slowly. "I'm not enjoying anything, Kyle. I'm surviving it." He laughed, a sound that made the air heavier. "You think you've won? You're just a guest here." His hand hit the wooden shelf beside my head, not me, but close enough that the sound echoed through the garage. I didn't flinch. I just looked him in the eye and said, "Then maybe it's time the homeowner called for a little backup." That night, I made one call, not to 911, not yet, but to Officer Lang. He'd served with Raymond years ago before retiring locally. Still wore the badge part-time, still checked in on the widows of old colleagues. I told him only what he needed to know, that things in the house had grown uncomfortable. He didn't press for details. He just said, "I'll swing by tomorrow for coffee." Casual-like. The next afternoon, Lang showed up in uniform, sunglasses reflecting the porch, that old measured calm of a man who's seen storms and still stands steady in them. Kyle was in the driveway, washing his truck like he owned the street. When he saw the cruiser, his smirk faltered just a little. "Afternoon," Lang said. "Just checking on Evelyn. Haven't seen her in a while." Kyle wiped his hands on a rag, trying to smile. "Everything's fine, officer." Lang didn't even look at him. His gaze stayed on me. "Good to hear. But I'll check that myself, if you don't mind." We sat on the porch, talking about nothing and everything, Raymond's fishing trips, his stubborn old pickup, the way the town was changing. But the silence between words said more. Kyle stayed by the truck, pretending to work, but every few minutes I could feel his eyes on us. Watching. Measuring. Before Lang left, he leaned closer and said quietly, "If you need help, real help, you call me. Don't wait for it to get ugly." I nodded, grateful, not for protection, but for the reminder that I wasn't invisible. When the cruiser rolled away, Kyle came storming up the steps. "You called the cops on me?" "No," I said evenly. "I invited an old friend for coffee." "You're the one who looked guilty." He froze. Then, for once, he didn't have a comeback. He just turned and walked inside. Melanie stood in the doorway, her expression soft, confused, but thoughtful. "Why would he think you called the police?" she asked. "Because only the guilty hear sirens that haven't sounded yet," I said. That was the day I saw it, the first small fracture in her loyalty. And once cracks appear, light finds its way through. It was supposed to be a celebration, streamers, cupcakes, pastel ribbons, laughter. But the air in that house was tighter than a noose. The guests were mostly Melanie's friends from church, sweet women with sharp tongues and polite smiles. I could hear the whispers before I even stepped into the living room. "Did you hear she made them stay in the guest room for months? She's controlling, poor Melanie. I'd move out if I were her." All courtesy of Kyle, of course. Gossip travels fastest when a coward needs camouflage. Still, I kept my posture tall, my voice soft. I smiled and served punch like it was any other day. But inside, every whispered judgment hit like a small stone. I waited until it was time for gifts. Everyone gathered around, laughter forced, cameras flashing. Then, I handed my gift to Melanie, neatly wrapped, tied with one of Raymond's old fishing knots, a small detail only she would recognize. She smiled politely, maybe bracing for another antique or something sentimental she didn't want. But when she unwrapped it, the room went quiet. Inside was a simple wooden frame, and within it, Raymond's old letter. The one I'd found behind the baseboard. She unfolded it slowly. Her voice trembled as she read aloud. "If this home forgets our love, remind it who built it." The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down. Even Kyle's smirk faltered for the first time. Melanie stopped reading halfway, tears forming faster than she could wipe them. "Mom, when did he write this?" "The year before he passed," I said softly. "He wanted you to remember what kind of foundation this house was built on. Respect. Kindness. Love that doesn't humiliate." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then one of her friends coughed, muttered something about fresh air, and the crowd began to scatter. Kyle stood frozen, the performance collapsing around him. His hand tightened on the back of a chair, knuckles white. Melanie clutched the letter to her chest. "He always said Dad saw things clearly," she whispered. I nodded. He did. Even the things we try hardest to hide. The rest of the evening was a blur, people leaving early, fake smiles fading. I stayed until the last guest left, helping clean up the cups no one finished. When Melanie came to me later, eyes swollen, voice trembling, she said, "I don't know how I let it get this far." I touched her hand gently. "You wanted peace. You just chose silence instead." But silence is never peace when fear fills the space. That night, I heard her crying in their room. Not quiet, hidden sobs this time, open ones. Like truth had finally found a voice through her tears. Downstairs, I sat beside Raymond's photo and whispered, "She's waking up." The house felt lighter. Not free yet, but breathing again. Because sometimes, redemption doesn't start with courage. It starts with heartbreak that finally refuses to stay quiet. That night began the way storms do, quiet first, pretending to be nothing. Dinner dishes still sat in the sink. The baby monitor glowed faint blue in the corner, a soft heartbeat of light. Melanie had just come back from her doctor's appointment, her face pale, tired, her steps heavy with thought. Kyle was sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone, pretending not to notice the silence. I was wiping down the counter when I heard her say it, soft, almost trembling. "Kyle, did you know Mom still owns the entire property?" His phone froze mid-scroll. "What?" She repeated it, voice steadier this time. "The lawyer told her. It's still in her name. Everything." He looked at me, then at her, as if waiting for someone to laugh. No one did. That's when the shift happened, the kind of silence that hums like a live wire before it snaps. Kyle pushed back his chair slowly, almost theatrically. "You two think you're clever, don't you?" Melanie frowned. "No one's being clever. We're just..." "Just what?" he snapped. "Plotting how to humiliate me in my own home?" I set the rag down. "This is my home, Kyle. You and Melanie are guests here, and guests respect the roof that shelters them." He laughed, not from amusement, but disbelief. "Respect? You think I owe you respect after you've been controlling everything? You act like this house is a shrine to your dead husband." Something inside me went still. Melanie whispered, "Kyle, stop." But he didn't. He was unraveling, and the words came like arrows aimed at everything sacred. "You live off pity. You use that will, that letter, like it's scripture. You think keeping his junk makes you holy? It's trash, Evelyn. You're trash living in a museum of dust." The word hung there. Trash. He said it with such venom that even the air recoiled. For a moment, I didn't move. My hand stayed flat on the counter. My breath was steady. But my voice, when it came, sounded like it belonged to someone older, calmer, maybe even divine. I turned to him slowly and said, "Then clear out one more piece of trash from my house." Silence. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the baby monitor pulsing quietly in the corner. He blinked. "You're serious?" I nodded once. "Completely." He looked to Melanie, waiting for her to defend him. But she didn't. She was staring at the floor, her face streaked with quiet shame. "Mel," he barked, "say something." She didn't lift her head. That's when he grabbed his coat from the chair, muttering curses that didn't quite leave his mouth, and stormed toward the door. The slam rattled the windows. But when the echo died, it left behind something beautiful, peace. A raw, trembling peace. He was gone. Just like that. The night air rushed in through the cracks of the door, cool and sharp. For the first time in months, the house breathed. Melanie sat down slowly at the table, her hands covering her face. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "I just wanted a family." "You still have one," I said gently. "It just doesn't look like the picture you were forced to frame." She looked up, tears gathering but not falling. "What if he doesn't come back?" I hesitated, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I knew too well. "Then maybe that's the best thing that could happen," I said softly. For a while, we said nothing. The clock ticked in that familiar rhythm Raymond used to call the heartbeat of home. When Melanie finally went upstairs, I stayed behind, sitting at the table with the quiet hum of the fridge keeping me company. I looked at the chair Kyle had knocked over and thought about how easily men like him mistake volume for strength. Raymond never had to shout to be heard. His presence filled a room with gentleness, the kind that commanded respect without ever demanding it. I whispered to his photo on the wall, "You'd be proud of her tonight." Around midnight, the phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You think you've won. You'll regret this." No name, but I didn't need one. I stared at it, then quietly screenshotted the message, saved it to a folder marked insurance. You'd be surprised how much power lies in evidence. Then I did something unexpected, I laughed. Not out of amusement, but relief. Because threats lose their teeth once you stop fearing them. I made tea, sat on the porch, and watched the streetlights hum against the dark sky. Somewhere, a dog barked. The wind moved the chimes. The world kept turning, unbothered. I thought about all the women out there, mothers, daughters, widows, walking on eggshells inside their own homes. How many of them are still waiting for permission to feel safe again? Viewers, if you've ever lived that kind of night, when fear tries to rewrite your worth, remember this: silence is the soil where disrespect grows. Speak once, even softly, and you'll see how quickly the weeds wither. If this story hits too close to home, subscribe, not for me, but for you. The next chapter may be the one that reminds you what freedom sounds like. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard the sound, faint, hesitant. The front door creaks open. I froze for half a breath, listening. Then Melanie's voice, low but clear, "It's just me, Mom." She stood in the doorway, her face illuminated by the streetlight. She was holding a small box, the same one Kyle had thrown into the yard months ago. Inside were Raymond's medals. "I dug them out from the shed," she said. "He didn't know I kept them." I felt my throat tighten. "Why now?" "Because I finally understand what Dad meant," she said. "If this home forgets our love, remind it who built it." She placed the box on the counter, then took a deep breath. "I'm not going back to him tonight." "You don't have to," I said. "You never did." She nodded, and for the first time in months, she smiled, tired, fragile, but real. We stayed up the rest of the night talking. She told me about the subtle ways control crept in, the small comments, the quiet manipulations, the way he'd convinced her that my boundaries were selfishness. "He made me believe love was obedience," she said. "Then it's time to unlearn him," I replied. By dawn, the house smelled of coffee and peace. The sunlight crept across the floorboards, touching everything that had once been shadowed. When I looked around, I saw the story differently now, not as a war between generations, but as a rebuilding of one. I walked to the window and whispered, "We made it through the night." The neighborhood was still asleep, unaware that one home had just reclaimed its soul. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a relic living among ghosts. I felt like a woman writing the final draft of her dignity. But even peace has an echo. Later that morning, as Melanie and I packed away the baby shower decorations, a car pulled up outside. The sound of that engine made my heart skip, not fear this time, but readiness. It wasn't Kyle's truck. It was Officer Lang's cruiser. He stepped out, calm as ever, and tipped his hat. "Morning, ladies." Melanie froze, her hand trembling. "Did something happen?" Lang nodded toward me. "Just following up. Heard there was a disturbance last night." On the shelf above it sat Raymond's letter, the one I'd found behind the baseboard, framed in glass. I touched it gently, then turned off the light. For the first time in a long time, I didn't fear what tomorrow would bring. Because tomorrow would bring life. Some storms don't end with thunder. They end in quiet kitchens, with two people finally hearing each other again. Maybe that's what healing really sounds like, not an apology, not revenge, but the soft sound of coffee being poured for someone you almost lost. If you've ever had to rebuild your peace after someone tried to destroy it, just know, it's still yours. They never owned it to begin with. If this moment touched you, share it in the comments. Tell me, have you ever found strength after betrayal? Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Mae, where every story reminds us, some homes are rebuilt not with wood, but with forgiveness. I never believed justice could be silent. But that morning, as sunlight spilled across my kitchen table and touched the edges of the documents spread before me, I realized silence isn't weakness. It's the sound of someone who's already won. The envelope came from Harold Quinn, Raymond's oldest friend and our family lawyer. His handwriting was firm and deliberate, just like his voice. Inside were the final legal papers. The transfer of the property to a family trust in my name. A clause safeguarding Melanie and the baby's inheritance. And most importantly, a restraining condition, one that made sure Kyle's name would never again cross a line drawn by decency. No revenge. No shouting. Just order, signed, dated, sealed. I sat there for a long while, pen in hand, the sound of the clock echoing through the room. My fingers hovered above the signature line. This wasn't about land or money anymore. It was about boundaries, the invisible kind that protect peace from pride. Melanie walked in, still in her robe, holding her mug of coffee like a shield. "Is that it?" she asked quietly. "It's everything," I said. She looked over the papers, her eyes scanning each paragraph, her brow furrowing at legal phrases that sounded too cold for what they meant. Then she looked up at me. "You're sure this is right?" "I'm sure this is fair," I said. I could see the fear in her eyes, that quiet, lingering guilt of a woman caught between love and survival. I reached across the table, placed my hand over hers, and said, "Sweetheart, this isn't punishment. It's protection. For you, for the baby, for the life your father wanted us to keep safe." Her eyes softened. "Dad would have loved this, wouldn't he? You're sitting here, signing like a boss." I smiled. "Your father would have made me coffee and said, 'About time.'" By noon, the documents were notarized and filed. It felt anticlimactic, almost too calm. But peace rarely arrives with fireworks. Sometimes it tiptoes in, holding paperwork. Then came the message I'd been half expecting, half dreading. A text from an unknown number. "You think a few papers can erase me? You'll regret this. K." I read it once. Then again. And then I deleted it. No reply. No reaction. The power of silence is underrated. It drives narcissists mad. 2 days later, Harold called. "He's trying to contest," he said matter-of-factly. I didn't panic. I just asked, on what grounds? Emotional duress. Claims he was promised shared ownership by marriage. I laughed. By who? The Tooth Fairy? Harold chuckled softly. "Don't worry, Evelyn. I've handled worse from smarter men. But I didn't want a courtroom battle. I'd already fought that war, just not in courtrooms. I fought it in hallways, at dinner tables, and in the way I'd bitten my tongue when my daughter's husband disrespected me under my own roof. I'd won my case the moment I stopped arguing. Still, I agreed to one meeting, a mediation session. Harold insisted it would close the matter quietly, with minimal exposure. I didn't want the neighbors to gossip again. This was between us and the truth. The meeting was held at Harold's office, a modest 2-story building on Maple Street, the kind where time itself seemed slower. The receptionist smiled politely as Melanie and I walked in. She was holding her belly now, visibly pregnant, moving slower but steadier. Then he walked in. Kyle. Thinner. Rougher. His once slick hair was unkempt, his shirt wrinkled. But the arrogance hadn't left his eyes. He smirked when he saw me. "Didn't expect to see you here, ma'am," he said. "I thought you'd be too busy polishing that moral halo of yours." I didn't answer. I just nodded toward Harold, who was already waiting with the documents neatly arranged. "Let's begin," Harold said, his tone clipped. For the first 20 minutes, Kyle talked. And talked. About how he contributed to house repairs, he didn't, how he invested in the nursery, with my money, and how I manipulated Melanie against him. I let him. Every lie was another rope tightening around his own neck. Harold didn't interrupt either. He just took notes, calm, surgical, detached. When Kyle finally leaned back and said, "So yeah, I deserve my share," Harold cleared his throat. "Mr. Dawson," he said, "would you please read this section aloud?" He slid over the original clause from Raymond's will. Kyle frowned, scanning the paper. "What is this?" That, Harold said, is your late father-in-law's explicit declaration that this property, and all its future value, remains under the sole stewardship of Mrs. Evelyn Dawson, and, upon her passing, to her direct descendants only. It cannot be sold, contested, or divided without written consent. Kyle's smirk vanished. That's ridiculous, he snapped. You think that piece of paper means anything? Melanie's voice trembled, but she spoke up. It means everything, Kyle. It means Dad trusted Mom to protect us from people like this. She gestured around the room, as if the air itself carried the weight of his manipulation. He glared at her, jaw tight. So that's it? You're taking her side now? Melanie's voice grew steadier. No, Kyle. I'm finally taking mine. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Harold broke it gently, sliding another document forward, the finalized trust form, signed, witnessed, and sealed. This is the last page, he said. If you wish to contest, you'll need to file a petition within 14 days. But I'll warn you, every claim will be met with evidence. Text messages. Police reports. Audio files. Kyle's head snapped toward me. You recorded me? I didn't blink. You recorded yourself, I said. Every time you spoke without kindness. His face flushed red. He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Just a choked, bitter laugh. Enjoy your little victory, he said finally, standing up. You'll choke on it. He slammed the door behind him. And just like that, the noise left with him. When he was gone, Melanie crumpled in her chair, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. Harold reached for a tissue box, but she shook her head. I'm okay, she said. I'm just finally free. We left the office in silence, walking to the car under the afternoon sun. The air smelled like rain and paper, clean, new. Halfway home, Melanie spoke. Mom, how did you stay so calm in there? I smiled faintly. Because I stopped fighting to be right. I started fighting to be peaceful. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table again, the same spot where this whole battle had begun. The paperwork lay neatly stacked beside a lit candle. Outside, the wind rustled through the magnolia tree Raymond planted years ago. I took a deep breath and whispered, It's done. But peace doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives in small ways, a quiet dinner without fear, a text that never comes, a lock you don't have to check twice. Later that night, Melanie came downstairs with 2 mugs of cocoa. Thought we could toast, she said, smiling shyly. To what? I asked. To the court of small truths, she said. Where justice doesn't wear robes, it just sits at the kitchen table. I laughed, a real laugh this time, not the polite kind I'd forced for months. We clinked our mugs together. The cocoa was too hot, too sweet, but perfect. When she went back upstairs, I stayed behind a moment longer. The candle flickered. The papers rustled slightly, though no window was open. And for a second, I could swear I heard Raymond's voice, low and proud. You didn't fight fire with fire, Eve. You fought it with truth. I closed my eyes and smiled. Because truth, when quiet, is the loudest victory of all. People think justice happens in courtrooms. But sometimes, it happens in kitchens, in the calm after a storm, in a woman choosing peace over pride. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to know you're right, and act like it. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to win quietly, without shouting, without revenge? Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Mae, where every story reminds us that sometimes, silence is the sound of strength. When I finally turned the doorknob, the hinges sighed, a slow, tired sound, like the house itself exhaling after holding its breath too long. That room had been sealed since the night Kyle threw Raymond's things into the yard. I couldn't bring myself to step inside. Every time I passed by, I felt the ghosts of boxes hitting wet dirt again, that dull thud that started everything. But now, weeks later, the sun was soft and golden through the lace curtains. The air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. For the first time, it didn't feel haunted. It felt like waiting. Melanie stood behind me, a paint roller in hand and her belly round under her shirt. "You sure you're ready?" she asked gently. I nodded. "It's time to make it a room again. Not a memory graveyard." She smiled faintly, and we began. At first, it was quiet, just the rhythmic sound of the roller brushing over old beige walls. The color changed slowly, from faded to fresh, from grief to lavender. That color had been Melanie's idea. "Dad would have liked this," she said, dipping the roller again. I tilted my head. "He was more of a navy blue man." "Exactly," she said with a grin. "The opposite of him. Something softer. Something alive." And she was right. Raymond built the bones of this house, the strong beams, the oak floors, the heavy doors that could survive any storm. But what I built after him was soul. The lavender walls glowed in the afternoon light like forgiveness had a color. As we worked, I found myself talking, more than I had in months. I told Melanie how Raymond and I first met at a county fair, how he tried to win me a teddy bear and missed every throw. I told her how, when this house was first built, he'd carved tiny initials behind the baseboards, his quiet signature in every room. She laughed, pausing mid-stroke. "You mean the same baseboard where you found that letter?" "Exactly. You think he knew you'd find it someday?" I smiled. He always planned farther ahead than I did. Maybe he knew I'd need his words more than his presence. When the last wall was finished, we sat on the floor with lemonade and silence. It wasn't awkward silence, it was the kind that hums with meaning. The floor was still bare, the window frame still chipped, but something about that space felt alive again. And for the first time, I didn't see what was missing. I saw what remained. That evening, I opened the old cedar chest, the one Kyle had called trash. Inside were the things I'd managed to rescue that day. Raymond's work gloves are still rough from years of carpentry. His military medals, dulled but dignified. And the letter, folded neatly, edges worn, words steady. I placed the gloves on a small table near the window. The medals went into a frame I'd bought years ago but never used. And the letter, I put that in a glass case, right beside a framed photo of us standing on the porch the day we moved in. The photo was slightly faded, but the smiles were still sharp. Raymond had one arm around me, the other holding a hammer, proud of the house we'd built from scratch. Underneath it, I placed a brass plaque engraved with a single line. "Built by hands that stayed kind." Melanie watched quietly from the doorway. "Mom, it's beautiful." I turned. Her eyes shimmered, not with sadness, but with awe. "Do you think he'd approve?" I asked. She nodded. "He'd say, you didn't rebuild a room. You rebuilt a home." Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat in the room alone. The lamp glowed softly, casting warm circles of light across the lavender walls. Outside, cicadas hummed in the distance. The house, once tense and brittle, now seemed to breathe evenly again. I ran my hand along the edge of the letter's frame and whispered, "You can rest now, Ray. We're safe again." But then I caught myself, and smiled. Because the truth was, I was finally resting. For months, I'd been fighting invisible wars, defending dignity, drawing lines, reclaiming peace. And now, peace didn't roar. It whispered. The next morning, the doorbell rang. For a split second, my stomach tightened, old reflexes die hard. But when I opened the door, it wasn't who I feared. It was Mrs. Dalton, our elderly neighbor. Her white hair framed a kind but knowing face. She held a small box. "I heard about what happened," she said softly. "And I thought you might want this back." Inside was one of Raymond's old baseball caps. He used to leave it at my place when he'd fixed my fence, she said. Figured it belongs home. The brim was frayed, the fabric faded, but when I held it, I felt something spark deep in my chest. Thank you, I said. Really? She patted my hand. I always told him, this neighborhood's lucky to have you too. Glad to see it's still true. As she walked away, I looked down at the hat again and realized it smelled faintly of sawdust and aftershave. The scent hit me like a memory returning home. By afternoon, Melanie joined me in hanging a final frame above the window. A photo of her ultrasound, the new life soon to arrive. Under it, I wrote with a gold pen. Where one story ends, another begins. When she saw it, she teared up. You're turning this room into something sacred, Mom. It always was, I said. We just forgot for a while. That weekend, she invited a few close friends to see the nursery. They walked through the doorway in quiet awe, whispering about how peaceful it felt. One of them said, "It doesn't even feel like the same house." And I smiled. It isn't. I didn't tell them that behind the new paint and decor was 1,000 invisible repairs, not to wood or walls, but to hearts. That night, after everyone left, I found Melanie standing in the room again, her hand on her stomach. Mom, do you ever think about forgiving him? She asked quietly. I took a deep breath. I already did, I said. Not for him. For me. She nodded slowly. I think I understand now. Forgiveness isn't letting someone back in. It's letting them stop living in your head. I smiled faintly. Exactly. Before heading to bed, I placed the baseball cap on the shelf above the framed letter. Raymond's photo faced the window, where the last sliver of sunset touched his smile. And just as I turned off the light, a faint breeze passed through the curtains, soft, steady, peaceful. Almost like a thank you. When someone violates your peace, it's easy to think revenge will make things right. But the truth? The deepest revenge is restoration. Taking what was broken and making it whole again on your terms. This room used to hold anger, grief, and silence. Now it holds light, laughter, and new beginnings. Maybe that's the lesson: healing isn't loud. It's quiet, patient, and deeply personal. What about you? Have you ever had to rebuild something after someone tried to tear it down? Tell me in the comments, your story might help someone else heal. And if you believe every home deserves peace again, don't just scroll, join our family. Subscribe to Voices of Mae, and let's keep building together. The porch creaked beneath my slippers, the same way it had for 40 years. Only tonight, it didn't sound old, it sounded earned. The air smelled of rain and fresh soil. Down the hill, the small town shimmered under street lamps. Every porch light looked like a heartbeat. Mine burned steadily, a soft glow against the quiet night. I sat in the old rocking chair, a mug of chamomile steaming in my hands. From here, I could see the reflection of the lavender room through the front window. The baby crib. The framed photos. The life that almost didn't get to exist. Melanie had gone home for the night. She promised to come by in the morning with fresh flowers for the porch, sunflowers, she said, because they follow the light. I smiled when she said that. She has no idea how poetic she's become. But then again, maybe healing does that, it gives your words wings again. A soft wind passed through the chimes above the door, and I thought of everything that had led me here. The shouting. The betrayal. The silence. How justice didn't come from the courtroom, but from the kitchen table, with paperwork, truth, and courage. I remembered that night when Kyle called me trash. I remembered standing my ground, shaking but unbroken. And I remembered the morning after, the first dawn that didn't smell like fear. Now, I could breathe without the weight of someone else's anger pressing against my chest. That kind of peace, it doesn't roar. It whispers. And once you've heard it, you never forget the sound. Inside the house, the grandfather clock struck 9. I thought of Raymond again. How he used to fix that clock every New Year's Eve, saying time only mattered when it was shared. For years, after he passed, I let it tick into silence. But last week, I wounded again. Now it ticks gently, steady as a heartbeat, a quiet reminder that love outlasts the noise. I took another sip of tea. The steam fogged my glasses. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Somewhere else, someone turned off a light. But mine stayed on. I keep the porch light glowing every night now. Not because I expect anyone to come back, but because some part of me believes that peace, real peace, needs to be visible. For years, this house looked like a war zone to me. Every lamp felt dim. Every corner carried echoes of what was said, what was broken, what was lost. Now, light has taken it all back. The hallway that once led to shouting now leads to a nursery. The room that once held grief now holds laughter. And the woman who once felt powerless now sits quietly, knowing she doesn't have to raise her voice to be heard. I leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking like an old friend. The air was cool against my skin, but gentle. I whispered to no one in particular, maybe to the night, maybe to you watching this. You don't have to live in the ruins of someone else's choices. You can build again. You can breathe again. And when you do, the air will taste different, lighter, freer, yours. A moth circled the porch light, tracing slow, clumsy loops in the glow. I watched it for a while, realizing how much that tiny thing reminded me of myself. Drawn to light, even after getting burned. Still returning. Still trying. That's what survival looks like, I suppose. You keep coming back to the light, even when it hurts. Later, I opened the small journal Raymond had given me on our 10th anniversary. The one with the leather cover and gold edges. For years, I hadn't written in it, I didn't want to stain it with sadness. But tonight, I wrote one line. Peace isn't silence. It's knowing you don't have to shout to be heard. Then another. Every storm teaches you how to rebuild. And finally, when the house becomes quiet again, listen, that's your strength speaking. I set the pen down and looked up at the stars. They were faint, but steady. And for the first time, I felt like one of them, small, maybe, but part of something vast and kind. The porch light flickered once, then steadied again. I smiled. You're doing fine, I whispered to it. Because maybe that light wasn't for anyone else. Maybe it was for me. A reminder that after everything, betrayal, fear, loneliness, I still choose warmth. And that's something no one can take away. I used to think peace meant quiet, no noise, no conflict, no reminders. But now I know, peace is the soft hum beneath it all, the knowing that your spirit is unshaken. You can forgive without reopening the door. You can love without losing yourself. You can rebuild without permission. So tonight, as I sit here under this porch light, I don't wait for who left. I give thanks for who stayed, for my daughter, for this home, for myself. And maybe for you too, watching this, wondering if peace is possible again. It is. It begins the moment you stop waiting for an apology and start permitting yourself to rest. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have fought? Forgiven? Stayed quiet, or stood tall? I want to hear from you. Your story matters as much as mine. So go ahead, share your thoughts in the comments. Because someone out there might need your courage tonight. Then softly, with a faint laugh. And if my porch light ever reminded you of your own, don't forget to keep it glowing. Subscribe, join our family here on Voices of Mae. And keep walking with us, one story, one truth, one light at a time. Every night, I turn on the porch light, not for who's coming, but for those who stayed.